Curses. We've all heard of them. Are they just cases of unfortunate circumstances? Or is there something really to them? Well, on this episode of Ben Solo, I'm going to present some curses in history that just might make you think twice before you enrage your significant other or decide to read from that spell book that someone gave you years ago. Yeah, probably not a good idea. Is there something to the curse of King Tut? And what was the most cursed movie ever made? Join me, Ben Chasteen, as I look deeper into these issues. You won't believe what I found. First, let's start out with one curse that most of us are familiar with before we get too crazy here. And that is the curse of King Tutankhamun's tomb, or King Tut. In 1923, Howard Carter and his team unearthed King Tut's tomb for the first time. And the scientific community around the world all celebrated. For centuries, grave robbers had searched but could never find King Tut's final resting place. So finally, the world could see that the tomb was filled with untold treasures, which in our day and age were priceless. However, many believe treasures weren't the only thing that was found in the tomb. Along with it came a curse that was unleashed after they found him. This is where the story really begins, because plagues began to curse Carter and his team. Now, the first death wasn't human though. Soon after Carter opened King Tut's tomb, a cobra slipped into the cage of his pet canary and was eaten. George Herbert, also known as Lord Carnarvon, was one of the expedition's financiers. He was next in line to suffer from the so-called curse. And by the way, we're not going to be talking about him being married to the illegitimate daughter of Alfred de Rothschild, but as you can see, the story just gets deeper and deeper, kind of crazy. But anyway, let's get back to our story. Soon after the canary was eaten, Lord Carnarvon was bitten on the face by a mosquito and later died of blood poisoning after opening the bite while shaving. So rumors say that the mosquito bit him on the same spot where there was a lesion on King Tut's cheek, but now there is no way to confirm this. This is for sure one of the strangest deaths. It is even said that Lord Carnarvon's dog died very soon after he died. Just a year after the tomb's discovery, another financier of the expedition, George J. Goode, died of pneumonia. And not only that, but in the same year, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother died from a dental procedure that went wrong. Think this is where the curse ended? Nope. Now, the leader of the expedition, Howard Carter, had a friend, Sir Bruce Ingham, who was given a paperweight made of a mummified hand. According to reports, the wrist had a scarab bracelet marked with, quote, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Soon after he was given this, Sir Ingham's home burned down in a fire. Now, believe it or not, when all this came out in 1923, the New York Times, which by the way was way cooler back then, actually ran a story with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes and famed believer in the supernatural. Doyle said in that interview, quote, "There have been other instances of persons who met with unfortunate ends under similar circumstances. We know that all the powers of the ancient Egyptians were used to guard their mummies, and they must have had great powers. Of course, I don't say that some Egyptian spirit did kill Carnarvon, but I think it is possible. There are many malevolent spirits." Imagine the New York Times writing this today. They might as well come out and just say that all the conspiracy theorists were right all along. Of course, the day that that happens would be the day that the New York Times files for bankruptcy. They had to borrow $250 million in 2008 from Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire. And of course, I wonder who else is propping these big media companies up. The CCP? Oh, maybe? Anyway, back to our story. Well, Howard Carter himself did not believe in the curse, but in the 12 years since the finding of King Tut's tomb, 8 people died out of the original 58 who were present. But the question I have is, did any of the other people take anything from the tomb? It seems like the ones who suffered took or removed something. They say that mold or some kind of bacteria caused these deaths. But if that was true, then why weren't the other 58 people attacked? Not only that, but a super strong odor would have been present, and there isn't any mention of that. Well, in any case, Carter died at the age of 64 of lymphoma in 1939, 16 years after the opening of the tomb. But the question is, did he suffer from other misfortunes in life that aren't talked about? We may never know. By the way, on a side note, the headdress of King Tut is another Mandela effect. There is now a bird next to the snake, and you can find all sorts of images online of replicas of the headdress with just the snake. This one freaked me out a little bit when I saw it. And King Tut himself may have been cursed. Some people think he was evil. Some think he was an alien or one of the Anunnakis because his remains showed that his body was deformed and feminine, not to mention the elongated skull. But the weirdest part is that his body seemed to have spontaneously combusted after it was mummified and entombed. Check out the Plague series from our Edge of Wonder show for more crazy info on that. Now let's jump closer to the present day and get into everyone's favorite topic, pop culture. A lot of horror movies seem to have been cursed or at least have bad things happen to them on set. The Exorcist, Poltergeist, Rosemary's Baby, and even Apocalypse Now, and many others. However, the most cursed movie ever made is arguably The Omen. Now, most people have heard of the movie The Omen, which is about a child named Damien who ends up being the Antichrist and is adopted by an American diplomat and his wife. Basically, grave misfortunes plague them and the people around them the whole time. I mean, I personally never watched this movie aside from the very end scene just because I happened to walk in while somebody was watching it. And spoiler alert here, so if you haven't seen the movie, you may not want to hear the ending. But in the end, following the death of his father, they are at a funeral and it shows Damien standing with the President of the United States along with the First Lady.
Excuse me, Mr. President. When you're ready to leave, your car is right over there.
In a moment.
Yes, sir.
Now, for some reason, when I was watching the ending of this movie in my early teens, I truly thought this showed me what the real Antichrist would do in the same situation. So I never really trusted politicians after watching this movie, but that is for a completely different episode. But getting back to our story, did you know that The Omen was so cursed that they even made a documentary about the horrible things that happened during the making of it? This all started 2 months before filming began, when lead actor Gregory Peck, who plays the dad, Robert Thorne, had a horrible family tragedy. His son, Jonathan Peck, committed suicide by shooting himself. This was just the start of disasters that plagued the film crew. There was a chartered flight scheduled to fly some of the crew, including Gregory, but it was canceled at the last minute. And it's a good thing they didn't get on the flight, because the plane crashed, killing all passengers. And not only that, but when the plane hit the ground, it also crushed a vehicle that had members of the pilot's family inside. The plane that the crew did get on, though, which also had executive producer Mace Neufeld in it, was hit by a lightning bolt on the way to LA. No one was injured, but I'm sure it scared them to death. And you know how they say lightning never strikes twice? Well, in this case it did. While producer Harvey Bernhard was in Rome, he nearly got struck by lightning. In a later interview, he said the devil was at work and he didn't want that film to be made. One night, executive producer Neufeld and Gregory Peck, along with some other crew members, went to go have dinner. On the way there, they learned that the restaurant they were planning to go to was destroyed in a terrible explosion caused by the IRA, or the Irish Republican Army. But this is not even close to the end of disasters here. In fact, they even got more intense. One morning, while still shooting the movie, Neufeld and his wife decided to check out of their London hotel a day early. Soon after they left the hotel, it was completely destroyed in another explosion caused by the IRA. So you would think by this point, you probably just want to give up, but after all of this, they kept pushing forward. Now, the interesting thing is that Robert Munger, who first came up with the idea for the movie, was a born-again Christian. He had warned producer Harvey Bernhard when he signed on to make the movie a reality.
You're going to have some very big, unexpected problems if the devil's greatest single weapon is to be invisible. And you're going to do something that's going to take away his cloak of invisibility to millions of people. He's not going to want that to happen, is he?
So during the entire production of the movie, Munger wore a cross around his neck. And during the actual filming of the movie, the stuntmen were suffering the most. The first incident had to do with the Rottweilers, who were all trained and never had any issues before. But when they were set loose, they actually attacked the stunt actor in place for Gregory. They destroyed his protective gear and kept on attacking. The dogs would not listen to the trainers, but eventually they were stopped before the stuntman was killed. This wasn't the only animal attack either. In the baboon attack scene, everything seemed to be all right. However, the very next day, the 22-year-old trainer Sidney Bamford was killed when a tiger grabbed him by the head, killing him instantly. Another stuntman went on to work with the film A Bridge Too Far after finishing The Omen. So he was supposed to shoot a scene where he was going to jump off a bridge, landing on an air mattress that would catch him. It was something he had done 1,000 times before, but for some reason, he ended up jumping in this awkward way, completely missing the mattress and landing on the ground. He woke up in the hospital and said that he felt he was being pushed by an unseen force. But the worst disaster to happen around The Omen was what happened to special effects artist John Richardson and his wife Liz Moore. Richardson actually designed the scene in which one of the characters gets decapitated by a glass window. You'll understand why this is important here in a minute. After wrapping up working on The Omen, he also began to work on A Bridge Too Far. One night, he and Liz were driving along a scenic route with no cars around. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a car smashed into them head-on. Richardson was knocked unconscious, but what happened to his wife was just as gruesome as the scene he had created in the movie. So the front wheels of the car sliced through the entire front end of the car and came inside, decapitating his wife. When Richardson regained consciousness, the story goes that he noticed that the road sign where they had the crash said Omen. And guess how far away it was? 6.66 kilometers. On top of everything, the crash happened on Friday the 13th. Now the crazy part is it seems that this isn't the end of the curse. The actor who played Damien, the Antichrist child, never acted again. But in 2017, he was arrested and sentenced to 1 year in prison for punching 2 cyclists, even knocking one unconscious in a road rage incident. And guess what day he was sentenced? You guessed it, Friday the 13th. Here's a fun fact though. The success of this movie gave Fox the money it needed to trust in an indie filmmaker's crazy space opera idea that really didn't seem to have any chance of becoming anything other than a flop. Now, after 40 years, it is the most loved franchise ever in the history of movie making. Well, at least that is until Disney took over. So continuing on the path of art, next let's talk about The Curse of the Crying Boy. Now this one is super eerie. The story is that people who have one of these prints hanging up in their homes have had part or their whole house burned down. So let's dive into this and see if there's anything to the story. So the Crying Boy was painted by Giovanni Bragolin. Well, that's the pen name of Bruno Armario, aka Franco Savi, aka Angelo Braglin, aka Bruno Amadeo. So why does a painter need so many names? Is he hiding something? Anyway, Bragolin made a series of paintings of children mostly looking sad, crying, or scared in the 1950s. Now, most of the children represented were poor or looked poor, By 1985 in the UK alone, over 50,000 prints were sold. In that same year, The Sun ran a story titled Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy, which told of the prints being in many different homes in Yorkshire that had burned down, but mysteriously, the pictures were completely untouched. Now, I know this sounds like somebody is making this up to get readers, but there is way more. So a fire station officer, Alan Wilkinson, personally documented as many as 50 Crying Boy fires dating all the way back to 1973. So you can understand why not a single firefighter would want that painting in their own homes, much less even the fire station. But guess what they gave Wilkinson upon his retirement? Yep, you guessed it. One of the Crying Boy paintings. I guess this is supposed to be a joke, but personally, that would just freak me out. Of course, Wilkinson turned it down, as would anyone else who believed that these paintings were cursed, but he did hang it up in the firehouse, I think as a joke, until his superiors demanded that he removed it. So after the story ran, The Sun organized massive bonfires for people to burn their Crying Boy portraits if they wanted to. Many people came to burn theirs as believers told their stories to the paper. But this naturally produced a large number of skeptics as well. In their article, The Sun told various stories that they gathered from various people in the local area. And what stories did I find when I was looking into this? Well, there was one story of a woman in Surrey who lost her home in a fire 6 months after buying a Crying Boy print. And on the Isle of Wight, a woman tried to burn the picture without success, which led her to have a string of bad luck. A man in Nottingham lost his home and his family was injured after he acquired the painting. There's even a story in the article about two sisters in the town of Kilburn, which is an unfortunate name, whose home burned down to the ground after buying a copy. And one of the sisters claimed that the child in the painting would sway back and forth while the picture was hung up. Kind of creepy, right? Finally, a pizza parlor in Norfolk had a bunch of paintings on its wall, including one of the Crying Boy paintings, and the whole place was destroyed in a fire, aside from that single painting. Anne Carney, a writer from the north of England, shared her story about how her family had the painting in their home and a fire destroyed everything in the kitchen. She watched how her grandmother took the painting off the wall and threw it in a large dumpster along with the destroyed kitchen's debris. She wrote that she never understood why her grandmother did this until she started to come across articles on the Crying Boy later. But this brings up an important question. Was it the artist who put something in this painting, or was it the boy himself bringing a certain energy when he was depicted? Now, some say it is not only this one painting that is causing issues either. Now, there were stories from a fire department on how most of these cases seem to have some kind of rational explanation. But the question remains, would these places still have fires at all if the painting wasn't hung in their homes? It's kind of like the Matrix, right? When Neo walks into the Oracle's room and he accidentally knocks over the vase, and she's like, oh, would it still would have happened if I wouldn't have told you?
And don't worry about the vase.
What vase?
That vase.
I'm sorry.
So what's going on? Is the painting cursed? Some say that the boy died in a tragic fire and his soul was trapped in the painting and yearns to get out. Now others say that the boy was from a family of gypsies who cursed Bragolin for painting their child. The most detailed story, though, was that the boy accidentally set fire to Bragolin's studio, killing his own parents in the blaze and then becoming an orphan. Now, supposedly wherever he would stay, fires would mysteriously follow him, and people later began calling him Diablo. The story goes that as he grew up later in life, he was killed in a car crash after his car burst into flames. Now, in a lot of ways, maybe one can write all of this off as like a weird coincidence. However, the BBC made a video in which they tried to burn one of the paintings. And as you can see in the video, the fire goes out before the painting is even damaged. Even people on the show were weirded out by it, and the whole show was about investigating mysteries. Now, whether this story is real or not, one thing is for sure. I mean, I would never have any of these paintings in my home, and if anyone I knew had one, I would recommend they destroy it or burn it right away. And who knows, maybe it is our own fear at work in cases like this. Or maybe the painting is truly cursed. Either way, I don't want to know from a first-hand experience, and I wouldn't want to see anyone's home burned down just to tempt fate. Well guys, I think I have to end part 1 here. There are so many places, creatures, stories, things, and even people who are cursed that I think I'll need to do a whole series on this. So stay tuned for more episodes where we'll get into various jinxes, cursed celebrities, and things that are cursed throughout history. I know you will like part 2 when I will explore more on this topic, especially when I start talking about monsters and witchcraft. Remember to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ben Chastain without a space. And until next time, I will see you out in space.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying this episode.
If you want to watch the rest and get access to our full catalog of content with hundreds of videos that will keep you entertained for hours and hours, subscribe to rise.tv.
Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss a single new drop.
Yeah, and we'll see you out
On the edge.